Credit card interest rates under attack. Congress accusing companies of customer abuse, and consumers sharing their horror stories on Capitol Hill, saying their interest rates skyrocketed even when they paid their bills on time. Now, here's what fed-up customers who testified earlier today had to say. Take a listen.
When I look at the money that we have paid to Discover during just the last 2 years, I feel sick. Of the $5,618 made in payments to Discover, $3,478.39 went to interest.
When I received my April 2007 statement, it showed an interest rate of 22.9%, with a minimum payment of $674 due on May 8th.
And my buddy Fox Business's own Dave Ramsey joins us now. Dave, good to see you about 45 minutes early for once. So
it's good to be with you, Dave.
Tell us whether the folks inside the Beltway were doing the right thing today.
Well, it's always good to talk about things, I guess. Congress has had hearings on the credit card industry off and on for years. And every time they do, they smack them down a little bit and they back away a little bit. But then they go right back. I mean, it turns out snakes have a habit of biting, and they're not going to quit biting. It's what they do. So we shouldn't be shocked that snakes do that. So I don't know. I don't really look to Washington to solve many of my problems.
That's right. You give advice to people right here, right now, to tell them how to straighten out their lives. But do you think there's anything that politicians should be doing that they're not vis-a-vis credit cards?
Well, again, I'm kind of a free market guy. I'm not big on Washington coming in and telling people how to behave on things. It scares me when they do that. It certainly would be okay if the banks made a decision to straighten up and quit being so dad-blame greedy and abusing people the way that is being revealed in these hearings. But, you know, there's a way to not let Discover or Chase or Citi abuse you. It's don't do business with them. You know, just get these things out and make a decision. I'm not going to play. And then you don't get charged that interest. And it's just not a magic formula. It is personal responsibility and it is corporate responsibility. I back up when we start talking about government fixing everything.
Well, I'm with you, Dave. I'm very much of a free marketeer as well. However, we do have loan sharking laws, and sometimes these interest rates amount to loan shark interest rates, no?
Well, what we would have described 20 years ago, I mean, I talked to a lady today that called in on my radio show that under this universal default provision, which is some of the garbage that's being uncovered in these hearings that these companies have been doing for several years, Bank of America had jacked her rate to 30.99%.
30%?
Yeah, and she wasn't late. The only reason they did that was her FICO score dropped, and the universal default provision says that if they don't like the way your credit looks, if they don't like something about your financial situation, regardless of if you're current or not, they change the terms on the deal.
Well, Dave, let me just stop you here. What would be considered loan sharking? What percent?
Well, I don't know. I mean, certainly we all pull back from stuff like the payday lenders when there's 800% involved and 400% involved and those kinds of things. We all go, well, that's ridiculous. But even in those cases, I think we've just got to teach people to stay away from these guys. There's no question this stuff is out of control and that there's corporate greed involved, all in the name of hitting Q1 and Q2 numbers so stock price does what it's supposed to do. Because this stuff's freaking profitable for these companies. There's no question about it. And that's why they do it. But, you know, I think the good news about Congress shining a light on it, even if it doesn't bring about a legislative fix, it creates a PR debacle when Discover's executives and Chase's executives have to sit there in the light and say this stuff's going on.
Now, Dave, you advise folks to just snip those credit cards wherever they are and whatever they've got in their wallet. However, let me just give you a contrary notion from a woman I had on last week, a lovely grandmotherly woman. She was in her 80s. She started a business of her own in her 70s. Her name is Lisa Gables, and here's how she said she did that. Take a listen. Then you had to come up with a capital. I mean, you didn't have the cash to start a business, to create a factory or buy all the materials. How did you do that?
My credit cards.
Your credit cards?
My credit cards.
You borrowed on the credit with what, 17% interest or whatever it is?
I maxed out because the banks wouldn't give me any money.
So, Dave, there's a wonderful woman, very responsible. She created a business by maxing out her credit cards. What do you say?
Well, she's a sweet little lady, but that was a stupid idea.
But it worked, Dave. You can't call it stupid. It worked.
It worked this time, but I have those people call on my show every day for the last 20 years when they got a basement full of the garbage they couldn't sell that was their latest business idea. And then it didn't work, and they're sitting there with a basement full of widgets that they can't sell, where their dream called a small business turned into a nightmare. And then they've also got $48,000 worth of credit card debt, and they're calling me up asking me if they're bankrupt. And so, yeah, it works sometimes, but you and I both know the Small Business Administration says 80% of the small businesses fail in the first 5 years. And the number one reason they fail? Debt. They can't cash flow.
Yeah, but Dave, that's part of the way our society works. The dynamic nature of our system is such that most businesses do fail in the beginning for a lot of different reasons.
Well, that's true. They do fail for a lot of reasons. You're right about that. But that's a misnomer, because the Census Bureau data last year said that 64% of the businesses that started last year in North America started on $5,000 or less. 64% of them. And so this idea that somehow you have to have $200,000 of capital to start a business. I'm running a business right now with 200 folks working on our team that I've grown over 15 years. It started on a card table in my living room, and I've never borrowed a dime. It can be done. It's just a different approach than we talk about in business school.
I got to tell you, Lisa started with a very small amount of capital. She thought because it was such a small amount of capital, she could go into a bank and borrow it. She couldn't get a loan from anybody. So with this credit crunch that we're in right now, some people are going to look at their credit cards as the only way to start a business or to help a business that they've already started.
Well, honestly, David, again, I'm all about entrepreneurs. I love the entrepreneur. I think they're the backbone of North America. I think our economy is run by the small business guy. If they ever get together, Washington's in trouble. But having said that, there's a reason she couldn't get a loan. Is because it was a very, very high-risk venture. And she added to that risk by borrowing on her credit cards. I'm really glad it worked out for her. She's obviously a very sweet lady. But that doesn't mean I'm going to endorse the idea.
All right. Dave Ramsey, great to see you. You got to prepare for a show coming up in just about 50 minutes right here on Fox Business. You don't want to miss Dave coming right up. Thanks for joining us, Dave. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Dave.
And now joining us, sort of preaching to the converted here, financial analyst and author of this book, Crash Proof, my friend Peter Schiff. Schiff joins us now. Peter, tell us specifically, let's start with that lady. Now, a woman who has done something that is not necessarily advisable by Dave Ramsey and other people who argue against that, managed to do it, pull it off, and succeed in growing a fine business. She's obviously an exception to the rule, but should she be prohibited from doing what she did?
I don't think she should be prohibited, but the problem is most people who are borrowing on their credit cards are not doing it to build businesses. They're doing it to buy things that they can't afford. And unfortunately, Americans have simply borrowed too much money on their credit cards. And I think there's a real crisis brewing in the credit card industry because over the last few years, Americans have been able to extract their home equity. And they've used that home equity to pay off other debts like auto loans and credit card debt. But they can't do that anymore. And what Wall Street did with credit cards is they securitized them the same way they did with subprime mortgages. And what's about to happen is people are going to have a difficult time making their payments. Now, you know, the credit card companies are jacking up the interest rates. That's going to make it even more difficult. Eventually, there's going to be huge losses in credit card debt. And the losses are going to hit the industry just like subprime. And then the lenders are going to pull back. And the credit is going to be tightened. And people are going to find that their limits are going to be reduced, and it's going to be very, very difficult for Americans to charge anything on their credit card because the lenders who are going to be hit with these horrendous losses are going to pull back. They're not going to want to buy this paper. Just like you can't find people willing to make subprime loans, people aren't going to be making loans for credit cards, and the whole thing is going to collapse.
So these things, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about asset-backed commercial paper. This is commercial paper that consists of debt, a lot of credit card debt that's divided into thousands of pieces and sold to various financial institutions all around the world.
Sure. Remember, Americans can only borrow money because somebody else is lending it to them. And Wall Street was able to securitize all this credit card debt and sell it all around the world to people who thought it was a high credit quality because they had all the diversification and it was securitized. But it's only appeared to be good because of this real estate bubble, which enabled people to stay current on their credit card debt by borrowing against their house. But that lifeline is gone, and a lot of these debts are going to go bad, and this market is going to blow up. And then you're not going to have all these credit card offers coming in the mail because the people lending the money are going to get burned and they're not going to want to keep doing it. And, you know, the whole thing, the whole concept of people borrowing money to take vacations, to buy television sets or apply, this is nonsense.
Right. Well, let me just say something that's going to shock a lot of people who know you, are familiar with your stuff. This is from your book. There is nothing inherently wrong with having debt. It's something that you just said, as a matter of fact. It all depends on the purpose for which it's incurred. When individuals borrow to consume, there's no income-producing asset that's acquired. Therefore, the loans can only be repaid out of reduced future consumption. So if you're using debt to start a small business or even to buy a car, that could be a good thing. But if you're using it just to consume something, that's bad. Is that the summation?
Certainly. I mean, consumer credit doesn't make any sense because if you buy an asset, I mean, if you buy a product like a television set, how are you going to pay for it? I mean, the television set doesn't generate any revenue for you, so the only way you can pay for it is reducing your consumption in the future. The way our parents used to do it, if they wanted to buy something, they saved up. And then they earned interest while they were saving. And so things cost them less. I mean, you know, people used to put things on layaway. I mean, now Americans buy whatever they want. They put it on a credit card. And then, like the women in these clips, you know, they end up paying 20 or 30% in interest over the life of that loan. They're paying for that, that television set 3 or 4 or 5 times over.
Peter, stay with us. We may need your expertise as we turn to our board of directors. Jim Pethakakis is with us. He's from U.S. News and World Report. He's the assistant managing editor. Evelyn Roosley, she is Forbes market reporter. And Eiley McConnett, she is Business Week staff editor. So, Eiley, is there any thing that you've heard so far that you disagree with, particularly Peter Schiff?
I think more it's a question of focus. What I'm really interested in is how some of the proactive companies like Citibank that has stopped this, you know, the surprise interest rate increase, how they're going to use this. Because if you think about it, there is a publicity or PR opportunity here. You could imagine them having advertising highlighting this practice and then showing what they're doing to counter it.
Evelyn?
And I think that what's really important here is to understand that even though the consumer needs to wise up, there also needs to be more transparency in this industry. In Bank of America, Discover Card, they need to tell their consumers what they're in for. I mean, otherwise, then they're going to default, and that's only going to make the subprime crisis even worse.
But, Jim, isn't that exactly the point? The fact that a lot of the details of these things you're getting into when you borrow money on a credit card are in such tiny little print at the bottom of your statement that there's no way you could read it even if you wanted to.
That's right. You got to bring out the magnifying glass. Look, you know, companies should be able to charge, you know, whatever they want, more or less, for products, as long as people understand what they're paying. So I think more transparency. Maybe they ought to get, you know, Warren Buffett. He writes very clearly those annual reports. Maybe get Warren Buffett to write out these agreements so people can understand them. But as long as people understand them, then I think it's their own responsibility to make sure they don't take out too much credit card debt. Exactly what Peter and Dave Ramsey were saying.
Well, Peter, let me go to you. Dave Ramsey, of course, is against government intervention here. Do you think that government should play any role in terms of capping interest rates, or which essentially amount to price controls on banks?
Well, you know, we used to have usury laws in this country, and I think the usury rates were a lot lower than what is being charged now. But no, I don't think the government should get involved in this. But also, you know, the government has really been subsidizing it in a way where, you know, they used to make the interest on the credit cards tax deductible, but now people are able to borrow money on their homes and pay off this debt. So the government still kind of gives you a subsidy for borrowing money if you happen to own a house. But no, I think the government should stay out of it. But ultimately, we have to move away from this credit card debt, and it's going to happen. These loans are very risky because there's no collateral behind them, and people have no assets. So there's a lot of defaults, which means the people who do pay end up having to pay usurious interest rates because they have to pay for all the people who don't pay. And, you know, of course, all this credit card borrowing is hurting our economy. It's hurting our economic growth because the money that consumers are borrowing is money that entrepreneurs can't borrow. And so they drive up the cost of debt for businessmen who would actually create companies and invest in capital investments.
Peter, I got to leave it at that. Peter Schiff, author of Crash Proof. Of course, Dave Ramsey, who you'll see in about a half hour right here on Fox Business. And you'll see more of our board of directors in just a moment. Well, on deck, the law clamps down on a master campaign fundraiser. But does that mean the controversy is over? Bundling, once again, it's back with Scoreboard.